Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a soot-streaked morning in Victorian London, where the fog clings to your coat like a needy cat, and the only thing thicker than the smog is the cabbage soup cooling on your stove. You're a postman, not a glamorous one. There were no glamorous ones, but a practical, punctual servant of the Royal Mail. The city's asleep mostly. There's a baker yawning through a door near Brick Lane, a horse whinnying somewhere unseen, and above it all, the slow, clunky gurgle of your soup bubbling in a pot as your only reliable timekeeper. You stretch your back, already complaining before the shift begins, and sniff the air. The soup's just at the turn, thicker than broth, but not yet a stew. Perfect. That means it's about 4:37 a.m., give or take a few bubbles. You didn't need a clock. You had Cabbage. Because clocks in your boarding house tended to run either early, late, or backwards, depending on how much gin the landlord had the night before. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from some quiet corner of the world, I'd love to know where and what time it is. Before you drop that in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The soup burbles low as you tie your cravat standard issue navy with a frayed end you keep hidden under your collar. You check your satchel, already half loaded the night before with urgent mail, parchment-scented letters bound in rough twine, and one parcel from the East India Company that hums faintly if you hold it just right. You don't ask questions. You just deliver. The window rattles as a coal cart grinds past. You sip a spoonful of soup, slightly bland, which suggests the landlady's sleepy, and it's still too early for her to notice you pinched the last sprig of time. You didn't invent the soup as clock system. It evolved naturally like pigeons or passive-aggressive flatmates. Historians still argue whether this practice emerged in East London, or if it drifted in from the mining towns where soup viscosity was once used to estimate the length of underground shifts. Your boots thick-soled and older than the Queen's last corset scandal wait by the door. The left one squeaks. The right one leaks. You pull them on anyway, feeling the familiar squelch of last week's rain deep in the leather. Outside it's still full dark. Gas lamps flicker like weary eyes, and everything smells faintly of cabbage. Chimney smoke and the neighbor's cat, who apparently lost a fight with a hedgehog. As you step into the street, the cold kisses your cheeks, and the soup sloshes gently in the little tin flask tucked into your coat. It's not lunch. It's your wristwatch. You'll dip a pinky in around sunrise to gauge thickness and pace. It's been right more often than the town hall bell. You pass Mrs. Ellingsworth's bakery. Her shutters are closed, but the scent of baking bread has already lured out 2 rats and a constable. One of them nods politely. Back in your day, meaning now, because you live perpetually in 1873, timekeeping was less about minutes and more about instincts. Your soup thickened gradually. Too thick. You're behind. Too watery. You're early. Too cold. You overslept and probably missed the 7:10 to Paddington, which means your supervisor will scold you with a quill in one hand and a half-written sermon in the other. Victorian life ran on routine, and in your little flat above the pie shop, the only clock that mattered was the one simmering on your stovetop. There's a comfort in that. A soft, steaming certainty in a world of uncertain telegrams and sometimes exploding gas fixtures. So you start your route. One hand on your satchel. One hand gently warming on the tin flask, tucked in your chest pocket, like a slightly soggy compass. The sky purples toward morning. You hum a hymn off-key, pat your satchel, and let the soft squish of your boots set the rhythm for the day. You're about 15 minutes into the route now, and already you've stopped twice once to hand deliver a soggy envelope to a cobbler who insists on telling you about his daughter's upcoming elopement and wants to readjust your sock, which has decided to migrate halfway down your boot like it's trying to escape Victorian society altogether. But you've got one thing going for you. The soup's still warm, still whispering that all is well. You pause beside a hitching post to take another pinky dip into the tin. It's thickened slightly. Not quite porridge, but definitely past soup. That means it's roughly 5:20. You nod approvingly and continue on. A few other postmen cross your path, all with the same grim determination and cabbage-scented breath. You exchange a nod with old Henry, who swears by turnip stew instead. He's wrong, of course. Turnips cool too slowly. Everyone knows that. Historians still debate whether cabbage soup as a timekeeping method was a clever adaptation or a desperate side effect of Victorian poverty. Some argue it began among Irish immigrants in East London who combined limited resources with old folk wisdom. Others think it spread organically as a poor man's sundial, thickening with such predictable consistency that it became more dependable than the town's public clocks, which were notoriously prone to delays due to soot buildup, spring malfunctions, and pigeons nesting in the inner workings. The Royal Mail, bless its woolly bureaucratic heart, never officially endorsed soup as a timepiece, but unofficially it was as widespread as shin splints and gossip. And cabbage was ideal, affordable, readily available, faintly offensive to one's upstairs neighbor, which only made it more satisfying. Some postmen swore by their grandmother's 3-day stew. Others added barley or split peas, but those risked skewing the timing. You kept it simple. Leafy, salty, and stirred every 15 minutes like clockwork, or rather soup work. Now as you duck beneath an awning to avoid a curtain of laundry flapping like angry ghosts, you catch a whiff of someone else's breakfast. Toast, with marmalade. Rich folk. You scoff and press onward, navigating the puddled cobblestones with the grace of a one-legged goose. Each step squelches slightly a rhythmic reminder of last week's downpour, and the holes in your boots patched with wax paper, and something you suspect used to be a part of a newspaper. You stop by the Reverend's house next. Always a thick stack of letters, each bound neatly with ribbon. The man writes to his sisters daily and includes a scripture passage in each. You once asked him why, and he said, "Because I like them to remember that salvation is not optional." You nodded, said nothing, delivered the mail with a straight face, and wondered how much salvation one ribbon can carry. By now, the city's beginning to stir. A scullery maid yawns through a window. A child in mismatched socks waves sleepily from a stoop. You smile just a little and check the soup again. It clings more to your pinky now. Denser. That's good. It means you're on track. The sun is threatening to rise somewhere behind the curtain of coal smoke. And the letter to the watchmaker, the one that smells faintly of lavender and anxiety, needs to be at his door before 6. You press on past shutters and shop signs and the faint clatter of hooves. There's comfort in the routine. Each step, each door, each predictable spoonful of steaming broth tucked in your coat like a secret. Victorian time was slow, foggy, and deeply personal. Clocks might have ticked in parlors, but on the street in the real world, it was soup that told the truth. You remember once being given a pocket watch by a gentleman, brass gleaming with an engraving on the back that read, "For the promptest postman in Paddington." It lasted 3 days before falling into a canal, while you helped a lady retrieve her startled Pomeranian. The soup, you noted dryly, had never betrayed you like that. Now you reach the edge of your first delivery zone. You pull the next bundle from your satchel, the edges slightly softened by condensation. You adjust your cravat, flex your fingers, and prepare to knock. Behind you, the soup burbles gently in its tin. Still thick, still warm, still right. You've knocked on enough doors now that your knuckles feel like they've been tapping on the side of a steam engine. Most folks don't answer. They know the drill. Leave the mail in the tin box, nailed crookedly to the frame, or wedge it just so behind the flower pot that hasn't held a flower since the Queen's last wedding anniversary. Victorian mailboxes, if they existed at all, were a comedy of errors. Some were actual boxes. Others were old biscuit tins. One man on Featherstone Lane insisted his letters be wedged between the jaws of a taxidermy fox nailed to the front door. It was, he claimed, symbolic. You suspected it was just a prank, but you did as instructed. The fox had a faint aroma of lavender and mildew, and once disturbingly you swore it winked. You pause at a corner and take another tiny dip of soup. It's beginning to coat your pinky like a light gravy. You smile. That's your 7 o'clock marker. And sure enough, a milk cart trundles by a moment later like a confirmation from the city itself that your cabbage clock is ticking true. The uniform you wear isn't helping the mood. Heavy wool, itchy at the collar, and stitched with all the generosity of a miser sowing his will. Victorian postal uniforms were designed less for comfort and more for visibility and discipline. Red piping brass buttons and a hat that had all the aesthetic charm of an upside-down teacup. You pull the cap lower on your brow, partly for warmth, partly because a chimney sweep on King's Road likes to throw acorns at you when you pass. Historians still argue whether the full uniform was required on all routes, or if certain areas allowed a more relaxed dress code. You personally believe it depended on whether the supervisor had indigestion that morning. There were stories of postmen being reprimanded for wearing mismatched socks, or worse, for getting the regulation cravat. One unfortunate chap in Chelsea once got a week's suspension for arriving with soot-smudged lapels. Never mind that he'd just rescued a child from a burning room. Your boots squish again as you trudge past the grocer's, whose early delivery of leeks has turned the sidewalk into a botanical obstacle course. You sidestep a slippery sprig and nearly lose your footing on a suspiciously squashed plum. You catch yourself just in time and glance around. No witnesses. Dignity intact. The morning light grows brighter, now filtered through the soot-colored haze. You can just make out the top of the gas lamps as they flicker off for the day, reluctantly surrendering their glow to the pale reach of dawn. A pair of pigeons inspect a broken wheelbarrow nearby. One looks mildly offended by your existence. You nod in silent apology and keep walking. There's a clatter behind you. Wooden wheels, clanging buckets, and you turn to see Florence, the midwife, trundling by in her cart singing a sea shanty to her goat, who apparently serves as both mascot and emergency hot water provider. She nods at you as she passes, tipping her bonnet with a grin. You nod back, lifting your tin flask in a mock toast. You glance at the soup once more. A gentle swirl, a mild resistance, thicker than before but still fluid. Excellent. That'll carry you through until the tea ladies start setting up shop near Bishopsgate. You mark time not in minutes, but in flavors. First cabbage, then tea and scones, then coal smoke and desperation. Victorian timekeeping outside the upper classes was often just like this, sensed through changes in smell, taste, and rhythm. The average worker didn't own a pocket watch. Clocks were expensive, and few could afford them. So they listened for church bells, noted the shadows, or if they were lucky, kept a pot of something bubbling on the stove. There were fringe theories too. One pamphlet claimed that the human body, when trained, could feel time pass in the bones. Another, less popular among physicians, suggested a person could measure time by how quickly dandruff accumulated on a black coat. You never tested it, but you knew one inspector who might have. He wore black every day and scratched his scalp suspiciously often. As you deliver your last few letters of the first leg, you pause beneath a crooked sign for a dressmaker's shop. The door creaks open before you knock. A girl with red-rimmed eyes and ink-stained fingers takes the envelope from your hand. She nods, closes the door without a word. You wait a beat, then continue on. Some deliveries carry more silence than sound. You pull your coat tighter, shift your satchel, and head toward the next stretch of houses. Your steps fall into a rhythm, boots scuffing the stone, the tin in your coat clinking softly like a second heartbeat. And still, the soup is with you. The sorting office is only a few blocks back now, but it might as well be miles. You're nearing the halfway mark, and your arms are starting to feel like you've been lugging bricks instead of letters. The satchel digs into your shoulder, and you consider briefly, traitorously, whether you should have gone into chimney sweeping like your cousin did. Then again, he did vanish into a flue in Bermondsey, and wasn't seen again until the next May, so perhaps not. You glance around for a stoop to sit on, just for a moment, just to adjust your sock. But the neighborhood has no mercy today. Every doorstep is either wet occupied by a judgmental cat or slick with coal dust. So you press on, letting your fingers brush the tin tucked inside your coat. It makes a faint sloshing sound, and you pause. A dip. The soup has thickened more cling than slip somewhere between broth and wallpaper paste. That tells you you're just before the morning rush. The tea carts should be out soon. A good moment to head back toward the sorting office for round 2. Now sorting letters by candlelight, that's a different beast entirely. You still remember your first day there. The air so thick with wax smoke you could carve initials in it. The senior clerks moving faster than was strictly human, tossing letters into pigeonholes with terrifying precision. You'd barely blink and someone would hiss, "Wrong box, Trumbull," even if you weren't Trumbull. Candles flickered wildly with every open door, casting shadows that made the portraits on the wall look like they were whispering gossip about your handwriting. And heaven help you if you spilled ink. You'd be demoted to envelope licking for a week, which was a punishment not even the rats envied. Historians still argue whether the post office deliberately kept the lighting dim to save costs, or whether it was an act of psychological warfare to weed out the weak. Either way, it worked. Only the most determined or cabbage-driven survived long in that room. Back in the present. Your present, the fog and soup-stained year of 1873. You're halfway through your route, and your stomach's beginning to growl. You take another tiny sip of soup. Still warm. Still vaguely cabbage. Still doing its duty. You pass by a row of shop fronts, shuttered. Still, save for one tobacconist whose door is ajar. He always nods at you, never speaks. Some say he's mute. Others say he's just Victorian. You tip your hat anyway and step around a puddle that's been in exactly the same place since last November. You're convinced it's permanent. A sudden gust of wind threatens to snatch your hat. You slap a hand to it, clutching the brim like a sea captain navigating stormy seas. Victorian hats, especially the Postal kind, were not designed for aerodynamics. They were designed to identify you from across a foggy street and possibly store a small loaf of bread in case of emergency. You near the bakery again. Mrs. Ellingsworth is out front now, sweeping with a broom that's more handle than bristle. She offers you a scone with one hand and swats a pigeon with the other. You accept the scone with a grateful nod. It's warm, mildly burnt, and tastes of cardamom and dust. Delicious. Victorian postal work wasn't glamorous. It was gritty, repetitive, and often involved trench foot and unsolicited advice about your posture. But it had its moments. Like this one biting into a lopsided scone, the fog lifting slightly, and the knowledge that by all accounts your soup still says you're on time. You reach the sorting office again. The door creaks in protest as you push it open. Inside, it's exactly as you left it. Organized chaos, half-muttered curses, and the scent of glue and regret. You hang up your satchel and begin loading the next batch of letters. The candles flicker overhead. One clerk sneezes violently into his inkwell. You smile to yourself and stir the soup flask just once, listening to the telltale schloop of proper timing. still thick, still true. You hoist the second satchel over your shoulder, this one heavier, stuffed with parcels of all sizes, some wrapped in brown paper, others with string wound so tightly you worry they might explode from sheer tension. Among them, one particularly mysterious bundle bears a return address written in blotchy green ink and smells faintly of kerosene and apricots. You don't ask questions. That's a rule. Stepping back out into the street, you feel the weight settle into your spine like a sleepy cat. But no matter your soup tells you it's just past 8, the city is yawning awake, and the real rush is only beginning. The air is clearer now, or at least slightly less chunky. You can see the shapes of chimneys overhead, instead of just assuming they're up there somewhere like mythical beasts with bad breath. This is when cabbage soup really earns its title as a poor man's chronometer. In the Victorian world, mechanical watches weren't exactly trustworthy. They lost time, they rusted, and they rarely survived long in damp pockets, especially those of postmen whose coats acted more like wearable dish sponges than weatherproof barriers. Historians still argue whether it was the Royal Navy or London street vendors who first came up with food-based timekeeping methods. The Navy used ship's biscuits and ale rotations. The vendors swore by porridge density and tea strength. But it was the postmen who turned cabbage soup into a fine art. You could practically chart your entire day from breakfast to last post by observing soup texture alone. You stir your tin flask gently with your finger now. The soup resists slightly like a weary pudding. Perfect. The upper crust mail will be arriving soon. As you step onto the cobbled path of Brambleton Lane, you brace yourself. This area is notorious not for crime, but for geese. Territorial, ill-tempered, and oddly intelligent geese. The post office has no formal policy on avian assault, but unofficial advice is to carry a piece of stale bread and throw it like a smoke bomb when needed. You've barely made it 3 houses in when the honking starts. 3 geese emerge from beneath a laundry cart, like they've been waiting for this moment their entire lives. You freeze, then reach slowly into your pocket. A lump of old crust, perfect. You toss it underhand, and the geese break formation, flapping in a cloud of feathers and indignant noise. You hurry past, trying not to laugh, the soup sloshing smugly against your ribs. Further down the lane, you come to a modest house with ivy crawling up the bricks like it's trying to escape. You knock twice, gently. A small, round man answers, takes the envelope with a trembling hand, and whispers, "It's finally here." He vanishes inside without another word. You suspect the letter contains either inheritance paperwork or a recipe for revenge. Possibly both. Your next delivery takes you up a winding alley that smells of coal tar and very old socks. The houses lean in close here like gossiping grandmothers. Children dart between stairwells. A boy laughs and someone is playing a fiddle, 3 notes out of tune. You wave to the fiddler, who doffs his cap and continues playing, undeterred by accuracy. You check the soup. It's entering its midday lull now. Still thick, but warming slightly. You'll have to reheat it later if you want it to remain useful. Some postmen carried second flasks. You prefer the challenge. The soup must survive on body heat and sheer will. And today, it's doing just fine. You duck under a low beam labeled, "Mind thy head." Ignore it, and smack your forehead anyway. You grunt softly and deliver a letter to a tobacconist who smells like raisins and thunderclouds. He thanks you by offering a single boiled sweet. It's gray. You accept it like it's treasure, pocketing it for later. No one eats Victorian sweets on purpose. They're mostly for emergencies or bartering. You take a shortcut through a courtyard with uneven stones. A boot heel snags for a moment, and your body does a graceful, wobbling dance that narrowly avoids catastrophe. You steady yourself with a hand on a railing, take a calming breath, and pat your coat. The soup survived. Barely. thickened slightly from the jostle, but no disaster. That's a time marker in itself, post-wobble density. By now, the streets are louder. The carts rattle faster. The foot traffic has doubled, and there's a newspaper boy shrieking headlines about royal wallpaper patterns. You dodge a man arguing with a sandwich board and wave to a constable who's clearly been dozing standing up. It's all normal. And according to your cabbage soup, it's exactly 9:15. You make a left down Whipple Street where the cobblestones shift slightly underfoot as though they're trying to rearrange themselves when no one's looking. The street curves awkwardly with houses leaning out at mismatched angles like they've had too much mulled wine. This is the trickiest part of your route. Narrow alleys, low windows, and one particularly mischievous goat that appears when least expected. The goat belongs to Mr. Willoughby, a retired dentist with opinions on everything, particularly the decline in envelope glue quality. You deliver his weekly parcel always from the same niece, always filled with marmalade and bold political pamphlets. He grunts thanks and asks if the Prime Minister has resigned yet. You tell him not since yesterday. He mutters something about cowards and slams the door. You take a breath and dip your finger in the flask again. The soup has cooled ever so slightly. It's still thick, more so now, reaching that stage where it moves like slow honey. You give it a swirl. This is your 10 o'clock texture. Dense, reliable, the perfect consistency for gauging your pace through the city's second morning surge. Victorian clocks were hardly paragons of precision. Spring-driven models were everywhere, but easily thrown off by humidity, soot, or the cat knocking it over in a fit of rage. Even public clocks weren't entirely trustworthy. They required manual winding, often ran fast or slow, and sometimes just stopped. Historians still debate whether the Great Strand clock went 3 whole days without moving in the winter of 1871, or if the locals simply forgot to look up. That's where your soup had the advantage. It didn't need winding. It didn't care about gears or pendulums. It simply obeyed physics. Heat dissipates. Density rises. And in that, a working man could find his way. You swing around a corner and duck instinctively because you know what's next. Mrs. Garvey's laundry line strung eye level across the alley like a trap. Today's line features 3 massive bloomers and a sock with a button sewn on for a face. You maneuver past with veteran grace, avoiding both embarrassment and entanglement. Next door, the butcher's shop looms. You're never sure what's more unsettling: the smell of meat or the wax figures in the window, dressed like Victorian sausages. The butcher's wife, Mrs. Hester, collects unusual recipes, and every Wednesday, she corners you to ask if you've heard of anyone cooking squirrel pudding in the north. You haven't, and you never will. But you nod politely and hand over the catalog she's expecting. Further down a narrow path splits toward the old watchmaker's shop. You've always liked this stop. The building tilts slightly to one side, the wood warped from years of damp, but the man inside Mr. Edelsby still keeps a dozen tiny clocks ticking away in perfect chorus. You step in briefly, just to breathe in the scent of brass and beeswax. He greets you with a nod and a raisin biscuit. You nod back and leave the parcel on his workbench, careful not to knock over a glass dome encasing what might be the smallest cuckoo clock in England. You take your leave, sipping your soup quietly in the doorway before stepping out again. It's cooled slightly more now. Time is passing. The day is stretching its limbs. The sound of hooves clatters behind you. A milk cart, this time pulled by a very round pony, who clearly regrets everything. The driver tips his hat and tosses you a warm roll. You catch it one-handed bow with mock flair and tuck it into your coat for later. That's your 11 o'clock snack acquired. The fog is lifting now. You can see the tops of distant chimneys, and birds begin their hesitant chirps. They sound less like a chorus and more like a group therapy session, but it's noise, and it means you're inching toward noon. You check the soup again. stirred now with your thumb for variety. It's thicker, almost past its peak. You'll need a stove before long, or it'll become an unintentional casserole. You make a mental note next break reheated at the tea house near Milford Lane. They let postmen use the back burner if you buy a pot of tea, and don't insult the marmalade. The route winds onward. You move like clockwork, but a clock filled with vegetables and spite. Each door you knock on each note you deliver is part of a rhythm centuries in the making. This is the heartbeat of the city. Clocks may tick, but soup flows, and you, dear friend, flow with it. You reach the tea house just as the soup begins to sulk. It clings too tightly to the tin. Stubborn and slightly gluey, an unmistakable sign that you've crossed the noontide line. The warmth from your body isn't enough anymore. It needs a proper flame. Fortunately, the side door to Miss Penelope's tea house creaks open before you knock. She's expecting you, as always. Back burners free, she calls from behind a wall of rising steam. Don't stir it too fast this time. You nod solemnly. You've learned that lesson. The last time you stirred with haste, the soup formed bubbles that exploded in dramatic little flumps, sending a single wilted cabbage leaf onto a customer's shawl. It's not a mistake one makes twice. You cross the tiled floor, nodding politely to the regulars. The retired schoolmaster with a penchant for poems about bricks. The former stage actress who insists every conversation end in rhyme, and a grocer who claims he once arm-wrestled Charles Dickens. You place the tin gently on the iron stove, unscrew the lid, and give it a few slow turns with the handle of your spoon. The aroma of warmed cabbage fills the corner. Comforting. Slightly tragic. Entirely familiar. As it heats, you allow yourself a few sips of tea. A dark, bitter brew served in a cup that's chipped like everything else in this city. Miss Penelope eyes you with approval and slides a small plate of crusty bread across the counter. You nod your thanks. You'll pay her in gossip later. Victorian postmen weren't exactly paid in gold. Your wages were modest and your hours unpredictable. But there were perks. Unofficial alliances like this one. Tea house warmth in winter. A cobbler who'd re-nail your soles in exchange for a banned newspaper. A fishmonger who let you cut queues if you promised to deliver his mother's knitting catalog first. Historians still argue whether this network of micro-favors was part of a larger, informal system, or simply survival instinct. You like to think of it as community clockwork, every cog greased by soup kindness and shared fatigue. By now, your soup is steaming gently again, a low, contented swirl that tells you it's returned to proper consistency. Just thick enough to coat a spoon, just fluid enough to sip without risk of internal regret. You screw the lid back on, slide the tin back into your coat, and rise. Your bones creak slightly. You nod your thanks to Miss Penelope, who is now embroiled in a debate about whether marmalade should be considered a weapon if applied with intent. Back on the street, your fingers warm from the tea, your satchel slightly lighter than before. This is the quiet stretch of the day. Not because the city's quiet heavens, no. A tuba player is attempting a solo 2 doors down, and a man in a kilt is yelling about geodes. But this stretch of your route between Clerkenwell and Bell Yard is somehow slower. Time folds gently here. You feel it. Even the horses clop softer. You take a side alley you know well. Most postmen avoid it. It smells faintly of mold and once featured a rogue rooster who had to be evicted by 2 constables and a broom. But the path is clear today, and at its far end sits a low stone wall, the perfect perch for a short soup check. You sit, unscrew, stir. The soup's perfect. Golden flecked with green. Comfort in a cup. You close your eyes as you sip, letting it coat your throat like a familiar lullaby. Somewhere nearby, a clock tower chimes. You're not sure if it's early or late. It doesn't matter. The soup says you're right on time. A cat rubs against your boot and sneezes dramatically. You nod in sympathy and slide the lid back on. Time to move. The afternoon light has begun to mellow. Less bright, more butter-colored, softening the edges of chimneys and rooftops. This is the golden hour of letters. The time when you begin delivering to shops, upper-floor apartments, and a pair of eccentric twins who believe the Queen secretly communicates through the placement of their daily circulars. You pass a window where a boy is building a tower of sugar cubes. His sister watches, unimpressed. You nod to them both. They nod back with grave seriousness. As your boots fall back into rhythm, the soup rides along inside your coat, warmer now and content. It is once again your compass, your guide, your very edible sundial. And you, Victorian postman extraordinaire, march on. You turn onto Peabody Row, just as the light shifts again, less golden, now more like tarnished brass. The wind picks up, chasing leaves down the gutters and flipping a wayward bonnet into the air. It lands near your feet, limp and defeated. You scoop it up and hang it on the wrought iron fence of number 12, where it'll probably be claimed or mistaken for a dish rag by supper. This block is competitive, not the residents. No, they're perfectly dull. It's the postman. The invisible war of shortcuts, route mastery, and unspoken Cabbage rivalry unfolds daily here. You, of course, don't participate, officially. But you know that if you time your path just right, you can shave 6 minutes off delivery between Peabody and the western lanes. 6 whole minutes. Enough for tea. Or on daring days, a toasted crumpet. Your rival is Ernest. Ernest the Eagle, they call him. Not because he's fast, but because he watches everything. Always popping out of alleyways like a ghost with a mustache. You catch a glimpse of him now, just a flicker of red sleeve vanishing around a corner. He's trying the south wall shortcut again. Amateur mistake. It's flooded with coal ash after Tuesday's chimney purge. You smile. Soup victory is imminent. You pause near a familiar doorstep and check your tin. The contents swirl with a dignified resistance, still warm, still full-bodied. The perfect consistency for late afternoon. Historians still argue whether this kind of timekeeping was intuitive or calculated. Did men like you develop internal soup-based algorithms over the years? Or were you just very, very hungry and used that hunger to plot the sun? There's an art to delivery timing. Too early and no one answers. Too late and the doors are locked and you're left stuffing official documents into boot scrapers. But with the soup as your ally, your rhythm rarely falters. You time your knock to the beat of your boots. 1-2 pause. Letter slipped. Next house. No wasted motion. A smooth mechanical ballet if the machine smelled of cabbage and wore threadbare socks. You approach Widow Farthing's house, where every week you deliver a parcel wrapped in old maps and tied with what looks suspiciously like embroidery floss. She invites you in as she always does for exactly 1 minute and 3 questions. Have you seen the comet? No. Does the bishop still limp? Yes. Would you like a biscuit? Also, yes. Today's biscuit is flecked with something she calls victory seeds. You do not ask questions. You chew quietly while she adjusts a birdcage curtain and hums a tune that may or may not be threatening. You take your leave before she asks about your romantic prospects, which she always saves for minute 2. Back on the street, you pass by Ernest again. This time, he's stuck at the gate of a very vocal terrier who believes all postmen are criminals. You nod sympathetically as he holds his satchel aloft like a shield and mouths a single panicked help. You do not help. There are no alliances on Peabody Row. Further down, the cobblestones grow slick. A recent drizzle has turned the path into a mirror of Victorian misery. You walk with practiced care, navigating puddles that reflect the soot-scribbled sky. The soup helps it slosh in your coat, acts like ballast, guiding your balance as you dodge an upturned cart and a suspiciously mobile hat. Your next stop is a dressmaker's shop with a bell that rings out like a scream in a quiet museum. You slip the mail through the door slot before the bell can clang twice. Inside, lace doilies twitch like ghosts in a draft, and mannequins stand too still for comfort. One has an eye patch. You don't ask why. You glance upward. The clouds are thickening, blurring the edges of time. The city begins to hush just a little. Chimneys puff in weary sighs. Windows glow faintly and shutters begin to creak closed. One last soup check. You uncork the tin. The aroma wafts up less sharp, now more mellow, as if the cabbage has resigned itself to the day. The surface moves like syrup. This is the signal. Evening is near. Final deliveries await. And somewhere you know Ernest is still dodging the terrier. You press on, warmed from within your steps. Steady your route, nearly done. As the evening shadows begin to stretch long and lean across the cobbled streets. You turn down Goosefoot Alley, named ironically, not for any avian presence, but for its oddly shaped fork near the grocer's wall. It's a narrow place flanked by high, soot-darkened buildings, with windows like tired eyes watching silently as you pass. You can hear dinner pans clanging, someone humming a lullaby, and the faint gurgle of a child laughing through a cracked second-story window. You've always liked this part of the route. It's quieter, slower, the kind of street that feels unchanged, like the city paused its breath here. The letters you deliver on Goosefoot Alley are often mundane reminders, receipts, subscription confirmations. But the people are not. There's a retired puppeteer, with fingers that still move like ribbon, a woman who teaches parakeets to whistle handle, and a man who claims he once traded a single eel for a landlord's forgiveness. You pause at number 9 and off. Yes, that's the real address where a woman named Mrs. Tyndall awaits her weekly correspondence. You hand her the envelope and she gives you a nod, then a small paper cone of sugared almonds. For the effort, she whispers, though you're fairly certain it's actually for not peeking inside the letters. You nod back, tuck the almonds into your satchel, and move on. A few steps later, your soup makes its familiar sound, a low glorp like it's sighing with you. You dip a finger in. The temperature is just below warm now, and the texture has become thick, soft, almost spreadable. This is a good sign. A late afternoon density. Your body knows this rhythm by heart. You smile as the wind stirs your coat, pressing the flask gently against your ribs like a reminder. You're still right on time. Victorian working-class families didn't have the luxury of chiming clocks or pocket watches with golden chains. They worked with sun positions, street sounds, oven warmth, and yes, stew. The richer the scent, the closer to evening. Some factory workers in the north told time by the consistency of porridge left for supper. Others swore by the firmness of potatoes left soaking in their pots. Cabbage soup in the south at least became the working man's personal hourglass. Historians still argue whether these food-based time systems developed out of necessity or culture. Was it purely survival, or was it also ritual? You'd argue both. Because timing wasn't just about punctuality. It was about control in a world that offered very little. When even the sky was choked with smoke and the bells could lie, soup told the truth. You turn the corner into Marigold Crescent. This is where the houses get taller, a bit more refined. Not aristocracy, mind you, but folks with curtains and clean boots. The mail here is heavier. Books, formal invitations. Hand-pressed pamphlets from societies dedicated to bird-watching, moth classification, or bread scoring. You deliver 3 parcels, 4 letters, and 1 sealed envelope addressed in handwriting so precise it looks like it was carved. You climb a short staircase to deliver a letter to an elderly gentleman who always insists on offering you boiled barley water. You accept out of courtesy, sip politely, and try not to grimace as it slides down your throat like liquid wallpaper paste. He watches with satisfaction, nods, and gently closes the door. The soup soothes the aftermath. 1 sip clears the barley's memory away. It's thicker now. The late-day lull has begun. A stillness enters the street. Horses clop softer. Children's laughter fades indoors. Lamps are being lit with long wands. You catch a spark drifting upward like a firefly, losing its purpose. You pass by a brick wall where someone has chalked a poem. It's misspelled, probably unfinished, and oddly profound. You read it under your breath. Let it echo for a moment, then tuck it quietly into your memory alongside delivery shortcuts and the flavor of last Tuesday's turnip stew. This is what people forget about time. It's not always measured in ticks. Sometimes it's measured in the swirl of soup against tin, the hush of an alley, or the way lamplight reflects off puddles, shaped like forgotten faces. And so, guided by a flask of nearly congealed cabbage soup and the rhythm of a city beginning to wind down, you take another breath, square your shoulders, and begin the final deliveries of the day. You cross into the oldest part of your route. Now, slate chimney lane where the buildings bend inward as if trying to speak to each other. The road is uneven. The stones rubbed smooth by decades of boots' hooves and dragging laundry carts. The air here smells of clay and coal, with a hint of stewed onions leaking from someone's second-floor supper. This is where the soup gets most philosophical. You pull the tin from your coat and swirl it gently. It moves slowly as if it too is feeling the weight of the day. Thick as custard now. A soft kind of weight. If it could talk, it might say something like, "You've done well," or maybe just sigh and nod. You stop at a small iron gate behind which lives Mr. Mott, a man so old he claims to remember when the post was delivered by men on stilts. No one believes him, but everyone humors him. You drop off his mail a stack of newspapers dating back a week, all cut meticulously into shapes that look like birds. He never opens them. Just rearranges them every morning by the hour of sun, which he judges naturally by the shadow of his cabbage stew. Inside, a grandfather clock strikes 4, but it's early. You know this, not because of instinct, because the soup told you. Its texture at this hour is practically canonical, like warm glue, but nobler, like oatmeal wearing a bowler hat. Victorian timekeeping, especially among postmen and domestic workers, existed in a strange gray area. Technically, there were set delivery windows. In practice, those windows were propped open with improvisation and cabbage. Official guidelines would state between 3 and 5, but if your soup hit a certain slump, you knew 3 had passed and 5 was coming. That's how you'd time a sprint between puddles. That's how you judge when to drink the last inch. Historians still debate whether these improvised cues, soups, stews, even candle drips, counted as real timekeeping systems. Some argue they were too imprecise, too chaotic. But they forget time was different in a world without electricity. It wasn't about precision. It was about rhythm. The rhythm of feet on stone. The rhythm of a pot bubbling on the stove. The rhythm of you right now walking past a cat in a baby bonnet who is somehow both judge and witness to your passing. The final stretch of Slate Chimney Lane requires a climb. 3 flights of stone stairs, slick and narrow, leading to a row of terrace homes stacked like playing cards. You climb slowly, boots scraping against stone, the satchel shifting as the weight dwindles with each delivery. You've done this climb so many times, You know the rhythm of the door hinges before you even knock. At number 37, a man takes his parcel in silence, eyes you, then shuts the door with such gentleness, it feels like a compliment. At number 39, a woman in curlers demands you admire her pet canary's new hat. You do. It's crocheted. It has a feather. The bird looks vaguely ashamed. By the time you reach number 41, you're out of letters and soup. Almost. You sit at the top step and take the final sip. It's cold now, thick as paste, but there's something comforting in that. Like the day has settled and the soup has chosen to sleep. You tap the tin affectionately as if thanking a friend. The wind moves softly across the rooftops. Chimneys puff and sigh. The city exhales. You watch a boy run down the lane below, arms flailing like sails. He's chasing a paper kite that hasn't been airborne for half an hour. He doesn't care. He laughs anyway. That's Victorian time for you. Not always accurate, but somehow exactly right. You close your eyes for a moment. Just a moment. The soup rests in your lap like a finished story. And then, with the grace of someone who's walked 14,000 steps on uneven ground, you rise, brush off your coat, and begin the slow descent into evening. Your boots meet the lower stones of Slate Chimney Lane with a familiar thud. Each step echoes against the narrow alley walls, as if the day itself is applauding your persistence. The weight of your satchel is all but gone now, emptied of letters, burdened only by a few remaining almonds and the well-traveled soup tin, which sloshes like an old friend, muttering its last goodbyes. You take the long way back, not because you have to, but because it's part of the rhythm now. Past the tailors, where the window mannequins are always dressed in yesterday's gossip. Past the stable yard, where one of the horses snores audibly, its head swaying in time with some equine dream. This stretch isn't for delivery. It's for closure. Down by Ashwell Close, the air changes. It smells of wet brick and roasted chestnuts. Someone is lighting a fire behind a curtain, and you catch the flicker of orange dancing on a wall. You pause and take another swirl of the soup, more out of habit than need. It's solidifying now, becoming one with the tin. That's how you know. Evening is here. The path dips again near the old schoolhouse, where stone lions perch above the entrance, worn smooth by decades of rain, and the occasional pigeon with impeccable aim. You recall delivering letters there long ago, pay slips, exam rosters, and once a very small hamster in a ventilated envelope. It was alive. It escaped. It lives, perhaps still. Victorian evenings moved slowly. Meals were taken in candlelight. Shoes were left near the fire to dry. And time stopped meaning to the minute. It became sound, the kettle's whistle, the scrape of forks, the creak of a floorboard. And scent stew, lavender wax. That's what told people the hour. That, and for you always, the soup. Historians still argue whether the working class trusted their senses more than timepieces, or if they simply didn't have a choice. You'd argue both. You could tell the hour by the stiffness in your knees, the hue of the sky, or the way your soup no longer moved unless coaxed with determination. It was a clock that understood you. One that didn't mind if you were late so long as you'd stirred it kindly. You reached the quiet curve near Peterman's Gate, where the cobbles smooth into wide stones. This is where shortcuts were born. Generations of postmen have slipped through here, carving routes between back doors. Bakery yards and alleys so tight you had to breathe in to pass. Here stories were whispered, arguments muffled, lovers kissed between deliveries. You walk slowly now, remembering. The soup has cooled into silence. You unscrew the lid one last time. The scent is faint, earthy, nostalgic. A whiff of pepper, a hint of onion, the lingering soul of cabbage. You tap the tin gently. No splash. Only stillness. The final checkpoint of the day. In this quiet moment, you realize that the soup has done what no clock could. It has marked not just time, but effort, movement, hunger, warmth. The hours passed not by counting, but by thickening. At the gate, you see something curious. A spoon, balanced perfectly on a fence post, clean, shining in the fading light. Someone else has passed this way. Another postman, perhaps. Another believer in culinary chronometry. You smile, pick it up, and tuck it in your pocket. A token of solidarity. A baton in the quietest of races. You turn onto Bleak Street, the final stretch before your boarding house. The sky above has gone from brass to slate. Chimneys huff their final thoughts. The world is tucking itself in. And so are you. With an empty satchel and a tin of time in your pocket, you walk slowly toward the door. Past the gas lamp that flickers with indecision, toward a bed that creaks a blanket that smells faintly of soup and the warm weight of a day well spent. The door to your boarding house sticks just slightly, as it always does when the weather's turned damp. You lean in with your shoulder, and it gives way with a groan of old wood and stubborn hinges. Inside, the air is thick with boiled starch and pipe smoke. The hallway is narrow, lit by a single gas lamp sputtering against the gloom, casting everything in shades of amber and fatigue. You climb the stairs slowly, the soup tin clinking with every step, a rhythm you know by heart. At the top landing, the carpet curls at the edges like it's trying to return to the loom. You step over it with the grace of someone who's tripped on it 5 too many times. Your room is small, barely more than a cupboard with ideas above its station. A narrow bed, a side table, a wash basin, and a stove. Everything smells faintly of last week's socks and eternal cabbage, but it's yours. You close the door behind you with a sigh, hang your cap on the hook, and set the tin on the stove like it's a sacred object. You light a match, coaxing a small flame to life beneath the tin. There's not much left. Just a shallow scrape at the bottom. But it's tradition to reheat the last bit before the evening settles fully in. This isn't about hunger. It's about marking the end. Victorian postmen didn't get applause. They didn't get pensions either, unless they survived 3 decades in a supervisor's good mood. But what they did get was ritual. Soup at sunrise. Soup at dusk. A ladle of comfort against the ticking chaos of the world outside. Historians still argue whether soup at the end of the day was more about nourishment or nostalgia. You say both. Because when you sit now on your narrow wooden stool, stirring that last bit of broth, it's not just food, it's a summary of streets walked, doors knocked, wind braved, letters delivered. You glance out the small window above your stove. The city is quieting now. The rooftops are outlined in navy blue. A cat curls on a chimney pot. Somewhere, a violin plays a tune no one remembers the name of. You watch stirring slowly. The soup loosens just enough to swirl. It's dark rich with flecks of parsley and thyme. You take one final sip. It's too salty. It's perfect. Then comes the logbook. Every postman keeps one, whether officially required or not. Yours is dog-eared, the spine-cracked ink smudged. You open it to today's page. The date, Wednesday, October 15th, 1873. You record the route. The notable delays, 1 goose related. The deliveries missed none. And the soup's performance. Reliable. Slight congealing post-noon. Good resilience. Final spoonful. Mild but sincere. You underline sincere. This is how you tell the story of time without numbers. In texture. In memory. in heat and silence. Outside, you hear footsteps in the hallway. Someone else's day ending. Another satchel slumped on a hook. You knock once on the shared wall. 2 knocks come back. Postman's Morse code. All's well. You turn off the stove, wipe the tin clean, and place it gently on the side table. Tomorrow, it starts again. A fresh batch. New cabbage. Same streets. Same rhythm. But for now, there's peace. You unlace your boots slowly, each knot a victory over the day. Your socks are damp. Your legs ache. Your fingers smell like paper and city. You climb into bed fully clothed because it's too cold to be brave and tug the blanket up to your chin. The room creaks around you, settling like soup in a bowl. And you, the keeper of the cabbage clock, the humble chronicler of texture and time, drift gently toward sleep. Sleep doesn't come right away. It never does. Not after a full day of navigating puddles, pigeons, and pudding-headed neighbors who insist on handing you their letters upside down. Instead, you lie there listening to the wind tapping at the window pane like a child who's just remembered a riddle, to the distant creak of floorboards under someone else's weary feet, to the kettle 2 doors down that always whistles 3 times before it gets shy. You shift beneath your blanket, one boot still halfway on, and stare up at the cracked plaster ceiling. It looks like a map if you squint. That one line there could be the river you pass each Thursday. That blob, possibly a cloud, possibly mold, possibly both. The city never really sleeps, and neither do you fully, not yet. So you do what every good postman does when the world is too loud to rest. You take mental inventory. Soup finished. Satisfying. Slight aftertaste of regret and bay leaf. Letters all delivered. One wrongly addressed, but the woman who received it was thrilled, so technically still a success. Shoelaces fraying. Left one officially more whole than string. Socks one intact. One might be a ghost. Dignity mostly preserved, though that incident with the rogue laundry line was a near miss. And then there's the incident of the cabbage-based sabotage. Yes, it's time to recall the great shortcut feud. It started innocently enough back in spring, when Ernest, the eagle-eyed, elbowy chap who'd once walked 6 routes in a single day for a dare, discovered a small opening behind the fishmonger's stall. It was just wide enough to slip through if you turned sideways and held your breath like a monk in mid-meditation. It shaved 7 minutes off the western delivery route. Naturally, you took it once. Just once. But Ernest noticed. Next morning, he left you a note in your satchel. It read, "Soup won't save you." You admired the pettiness. The next week, you added just a whisper of cornstarch to your soup to thicken it faster. Ernest, in return, accidentally dropped a sack of cabbage outside your boarding house door, ensuring you'd spend 20 minutes stepping over leafy debris before even tying your boots. The feud escalated. One morning, your soup had mysteriously been salted twice. Another day, Ernest's coat went mysteriously missing from the office rack, only to be found 3 hours later, wrapped around a lamppost and filled with potato peelings. Historians, of course, don't record these things. They write about railway reforms and penny postage innovations, but they miss the small, cabbage-scented battles that defined the real tempo of Victorian postal life. Eventually, the feud fizzled. Ernest stopped using the shortcut after he was chased by a cat with a shoelace vendetta. You, in a moment of weary truce, offered him half a hard-boiled egg and a nod across the sorting room. Peace was restored. You smile now, lying in the half-dark remembering. The absurdity, the soup, the rhythm of it all. Another creak in the hallway. You glance toward the door. The shadow under it moves and pauses. Then, a gentle knock. Just one. You know that knock. It's Billy the lad from upstairs, barely 16. Face always smudged with ink and convinced the post is a sacred calling handed down by pigeons. You rise with a groan, cross the room, and open the door. Billy stands there holding out a folded paper and a sheepish grin. "I think this was meant for Mr. Fenwick," he whispers. You take it, nod, and send him off with a ruffle of his hair and a wink. You don't ask why he's still up. You both know why. The post doesn't rest easily. Back in bed, you slide under the blanket again, the warmth wrapping around your legs like a satisfied cat. Your thoughts return to the soup, now cooled and cleaned, waiting on the side table like a loyal pocket watch with leaves in it. One more day behind you. One more cabbage-stained chapter complete. And in the morning, the cycle begins anew. Another batch, another route, another moment when you dip a finger in and nod, knowing it's time. The wind picks up in the alley behind your boarding house, sending a shiver through the thin glass of your window. You roll over, tug the blanket higher, and listen to the familiar whistle of the breeze as it curls around the brick. That whistle is a bedtime lullaby of sorts, a soft reminder that while the city thrashes and chatters during the day by night, it simply exhales. You finally toe off that last boot, letting it thunk gently to the floor. Your toes, grateful for freedom, wiggle with theatrical relief. And there it is again, that flicker of quiet satisfaction that settles over you at the close of each day. Not pride exactly, but something simpler, a kind of calm. You did your part. No one wrote a song about it, but the city moved because of it. You think briefly of the oddities from today's round the hat-wearing canary, the chalked poem on the wall, the man who tried to pay for his parcel with a button and a compliment, all of it tucked neatly between one cabbage swirl and the next. Then your mind drifts to the inevitable decline of soup timekeeping. It had to happen, of course. You remember the first official clock they issued, bronze, bulky, and wildly inaccurate in the rain. The post office heralded it as a modern marvel, but most of you stuck to soup for another year, quietly ignoring the factory-issued monstrosities ticking wildly in your coat pockets like confused beetles. Soup, after all, didn't care about minutes and seconds. Soup understood context. Soup responded to your walk, your warmth, your delay at the fishmonger's. It thickened at its own pace, and you respected it for that. Historians still argue whether the clocks were more efficient in the long run. Certainly they made reporting easier, if less delicious. The paper pushers preferred fixed numbers, measurable routes. The art of time-thickened broth lost to them. It wasn't just the clocks either. The city changed. Routes grew, but hearts shrank. Fewer tea-house stops. Fewer neighbors at the window with warm biscuits and weather gossip. Cabbage soup became a quiet relic like hand-tied letters or whistled postcodes. You remember when they finally banned soup on the route. Unhygienic, someone said. Unprofessional, muttered another. You'd laughed bitterly into your last steaming tin, whispering unwise, and sipped anyway. A knock on your memory. You shake your head. You're drifting. Back to the now. You reach over to your small side table, fingers brushing against the worn metal of the soup tin. You lift it. Empty, cool, but still holding the ghost of warmth. You unscrew the lid and peer inside, not to check, but out of respect. The day lived in there after all. You whisper half to yourself. Well done, old friend. There's something about old routines that resist extinction. You still rise before dawn. Still let your finger test the broth before you lace your boots. The soup may no longer mark time for others, but it does for you. It always will. You place the tin down gently and exhale. Outside, the lamplighter makes his rounds, the hiss of gas jets flaring for a breath before settling into their nighttime glow. His footsteps are the last rhythm of the day, echoing down the lane like a heartbeat, slowing for sleep. You feel yourself soften into the mattress, your body folding into stillness. The pillow smells faintly of starch and comfort. The blanket tucks around your knees just right. Your boots lie abandoned near the foot of the bed. One of them sighs. And somewhere down the street, another postman is walking his final steps, soup swirling quietly in his coat. The city carries on. Tomorrow, another kettle will boil. Another cabbage will surrender to broth. And time once more will thicken. The morning returns slowly like an old friend with sore knees. Before your eyes open, you feel it, the shift in the air. The quiet that only happens just before the first bird dares to chirp. The street is still. The fog hasn't lifted yet. And somewhere far below your window, a cartwheel creaks to life. You blink against the dim gray light. The ceiling still the same cracked map of imagined rivers and islands. Your body aches in the usual places which you reason is a sign you're still alive and employed. You sit up slowly. Your boots are exactly where you left them. Askew, sullen, waiting. You pat them once like tired pets. Your first stop is the stove. You don't even speak. The soup tin is waiting. You unscrew the lid, inhale. It's just water for now. Maybe the ghost of yesterday's leaf still clinging to the sides. But the ritual begins here. You add cabbage coarsely chopped, a sliver of onion, a pinch of salt, maybe a carrot shaving if you're feeling extravagant. The flame flickers to life under the tin, and you watch it begin its slow transformation. This is your real clock, and as it warms, so do you. You roll your shoulders, stretch your arms, and begin the quiet dressing routine. One sock with a hole in the toe, one that might outlive you, trousers that sag but remain loyal, shirt waistcoat, cravat still slightly cabbage-scented from yesterday, and finally the coat, as familiar as a lullaby, heavy with roots and rain. The soup bubbles. You stir it once. Not out of necessity, out of respect. Somewhere in the building, someone drops a spoon, a muffled curse. A floorboard whines under movement. The city is waking. But here in your small room with its narrow bed and faithful tin time is already flowing, thickening softly in the flame's golden cradle. You sit, spoon in hand. You dip. The soup is thin. You smile. That means it's early. Perfect. The moment stretches and you let it. You think of Ernest of the twins on Marigold Crescent, of the goose on Brambleton Lane, of the letters delivered and those still to come, of footsteps echoed in alleys and warmth traded for words. And then, as the soup reaches just the right slosh, you rise. You tie your boots, sling your satchel, and nod to the tin. A new day begins slow and steam-wrapped. You step into the city. The fog accepts you. The soup begins to count. Word count 1072. Wind down 300 words. And now, as the last footsteps fade and the city lies wrapped in its evening hush, you let the rhythm settle. There is no rush here. No ticking clock, just the soft hum of memory, the weight of wool on your shoulders, and the faint scent of soup that clings like a lullaby to your coat. Let your breathing slow. Feel your limbs sink gently as if the mattress beneath you has become warm, stone steady, and safe. The stories of the day, postcards and puddles, stairwells and spoons, drift away one by one. You don't need to hold on to them. They were carried with care. They were delivered. And now, all that's left is quiet. Imagine that final swirl of soup in the tin cooling on the windowsill as the stars begin to show. The city below exhales. The rooftops glisten in the lantern light. And somewhere a cat curls on a sill. A kettle clicks off. A letter slides under a door. This is the soft space between days. A moment to rest. To drift. Let the street sounds grow faint. A distant cartwheel. The tap of boots in puddles. The rustle of a page being turned. Let them fall away. You've walked your route. You've kept time in the gentlest way. Now let go. Float if only for a while. The city will wait, and so will the soup.